How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It's Keaton here. A little bit of a different topic today, but something I'm actually really passionate about. And for those of you who are looking to start online businesses, I know it's all about freedom for you. So it's about freedom for me, freedom to travel, freedom to spend my time how I want. And I've picked up a thing or two. I've learned a lot about how to travel for cheap and how to travel and enjoy it without spending like every single cent that you've ever made. I want to start out this video with one of my favorite quotes, and the quote is, "Before the development of tourism, travel was conceived to be like study, and its fruits were considered to be the adornment of the mind and the formation of the judgment." I love that quote because it helps us see that travel is education. And for someone that didn't go to college, I definitely agree with that. The 6 months that I spent in London in 2020 were really formative for me. I learned a ton about other cultures, and I ended up meeting my fiance because of it. And there's a lot of really cool stories that have come from that. I also have lived in DC. I've been to India, I've been to Mexico, and all of these other places. Every single time I go, I'm so grateful that I just get out of my bubble and start experiencing other people's way of living and other people's reality, because it helps me just be a better human and like treat people the right way. So I would highly recommend, I know if you're watching this, you're probably into travel already, but I would highly recommend getting even more into it, especially if you haven't done much of it. So there are 5 things we need to cover when it comes to travel. First one is flights, or actually getting to different places. Second one is accommodations, where you're gonna stay. Third one is food. Fourth one is getting around while you're in wherever you are. And then the fifth one is what experiences to have there and how to decide when to go and where and why. First of all, let's talk about flights. How do you get the cheapest flights? How do you make sure that they're actually good flights, you're gonna arrive on time, all that kind of thing. So what I like to use is Google Flights. And this came as a recommendation from Nate O'Brien, and I've loved it since then. So let's say I'm in Salt Lake City and I want to go to London. And I click there, and I can set my dates on here, and it just shows me what's going to be available for those dates. But a cool hack that you can do is if you come back here to the Explore button, and if I come here and type London, and then I go back and change this to flexible dates, and we want to say we're going for 1 week in the next 6 months, let's say, and I change this to London, you can scroll down and you'll see how my flights may have been $800 before, but now they're going to be $600 if I choose the right airline to go on. One thing to consider is that if you spend, for example, 17 hours and 40 minutes on a flight to save $30, you're actually just cutting your vacation down by 5 hours and cutting down the time that you could actually enjoy being there. So it's definitely worth, I would say, taking this second one, paying a little bit extra, and getting there in 13 hours instead of in almost 18 hours. If you're not super flexible with your dates, I totally understand that, but Google Flights is going to give you, it's like Kayak or one of those other travel sites that kind of helps you see everything in one spot, except it's by Google. In my opinion, Google is definitely the best place to search for anything because they're the category king there, and they pretty much always will be. Another place I like to look for cheap flights, though, especially if you're in the US, is on Southwest. And the cool thing about Southwest, it's actually one of the highest performing companies in the S&P 500 because they're so good at what they do. They're super reliable, they're super affordable. You get free bags, 2 free bags on every single flight, plus a carry-on. And it's a good experience. You kind of do feel like you're just getting crammed in with a bunch of people. But if you don't mind that and you're not super bougie and want to fly first class, Southwest is hands down the best way to go when you're flying in the US, pretty much, I would say. And what's crazy is that Google Flights can't actually pull the information from Southwest for some reason. And so when you're looking on Google Flights, you might find, oh, this is the lowest here, but if you go on Southwest, you'll see that it's even lower. So let's look at an example here. We're going from Salt Lake City to, let's say, Austin, Texas, and we want to leave in March for, a few days. And we're going to search here. Now it'll pull up everything that's available. They have these 3 different types of, it looks like flying out. It's quite expensive here. But if we go to the low fare calendar, and again, if we're flexible on our dates, which can help us save a lot of money, you can see that if I go on this Wednesday instead of on this Friday, I'm going to save tons of money. So it might be worth pushing my trip up a little bit to do that. You will have to pay more in accommodations, but it's worth saving on the flights if you're going to enjoy the time while you're there and you have a flexible profession that would allow you to do that. So Southwest and Google Flights are my two favorite places to find flights, but there's a couple other tips I want to give you when it comes to flights. Here in Utah, we have something called Flights from Home. It's an Instagram page that actually just throws out deals, like crazy deals, like $200 round trip to Hawaii flights. Stuff like that, and they'll throw them out on their Instagram. They'll say there's only 10 or 20 available of these, and people will jump on it and kind of book these last minute trips and get them for super cheap, which is very cool. So look in your area and see if there's a different version of that. Like search maybe alternative for flights from home for your area, or ask on Reddit or something and see if there's something like that, because I've heard a lot of people with great experiences from that. Then my last tip when it comes to flights is just do not check any bags. I don't check bags when I fly because it makes me wait a lot longer. And recently at the airport, I've had to wait up to an hour to get my bags off of the airplane. And when you don't check bags, like all you do is just bring a carry-on and a personal item. Usually you don't have to pay extra, and you can just walk off the plane, get your Uber, go to your hotel, and you're good. You don't have to sit there and wait for the airport staff to bring you all your stuff. All right, with all of that said, now let's talk about accommodations. Where should you stay? I think Airbnb is probably the best option in the States and Canada, and there's some really good ones in Mexico and also just in Europe likely, but I've heard about really bad experiences with Airbnbs in certain countries. So you really need to make sure you read the reviews. Depending on where you're going, make sure you book something that seems reputable, the host gets back to you, so you're not staying in like one of these nightmare Airbnb stories where there's like stale, moldy cheeseburgers under the bed, nobody cleaned the sheets, like all of that. That's not what you want to be dealing with when you're traveling, so make sure you check the reviews on Airbnb. If you can't seem to find a good Airbnb, or they all seem too expensive, or maybe they're booked out, the cheap ones are booked out, then in some areas you can find pretty cheap hotels. I went and stayed in Edinburgh for a week in Scotland, and I think my hotel was like $30 a night or something like that. And it was super nice. They had breakfast downstairs. You had to pay for the breakfast, but it was like $10 or something. It was completely fine. And I really enjoyed my experience there. But all the Airbnbs were closer to like $60, $70, $80 a night for something that would sleep one. I think for solo travelers, sometimes the hotels can be a little bit better than the Airbnbs, because typically those are built for multiple people coming, unless it's like a private room Airbnb, which I've done before, but it was a little weird. And a big thing when it comes to accommodations is you just have to find what's important to you. Is it really important to you that you have a great view so that you can take Instagram photos, or are you fine being a couple blocks off the beach, 2-minute walk, but you don't have as good of photos from your hotel room? The second one is more of the type of traveler that I am, and you just have to figure out what matters to you. You can pay a lot for accommodations, or you can pay very little, and you can pay anywhere in between. Two other ideas when it comes to accommodations, depending on how long you're staying. The first one is to just stay with friends. If you're visiting somewhere, likely you know someone that might know someone, or maybe you just have a friend there that you're visiting. Stay with them to help save money. The second option is there are plenty of Facebook groups and subreddits for the specific area that you might be able to log on and find places. Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, recommends finding places on Craigslist. When I tried to use Craigslist to find a place to live in London, I found some really sketchy things. The Facebook groups were super sketchy as well, and it was all like, living with people that I had no idea about. There could be some crazy things going on. And if you like that, it's kind of like staying in a hostel, then that's great. But for those of us who like privacy and like security, you can find some of these really good price that people don't want to put on Airbnb or Vrbo, but they want to put on here, and obviously it's a slightly less secure, but the price might make it worth it for you. Anyway, to clarify that point, you might be able to find something good on Craigslist, Facebook groups, or Reddit, but it could be absolutely nothing, or nothing that you're comfortable with on there. Also, Airbnbs typically offer monthly stay discounts. So if you stay for an entire month, they'll take like $1,000 or $1,500 off of what you would be paying, which is really cool. And there's some really awesome Airbnbs you can stay in and really enjoy your time at, and that will really make your trip more enjoyable if you're able to book them. So definitely look into that. All right, so moving on, the third thing we want to talk about today is food. Guys, I think this is one of the things that people spend way too much money on, and it's honestly a myth that you have to spend a lot of money on your food while you're traveling. You really don't. I was under the impression that when I went to London, things would be super expensive. I'd be just paying out the wazoo for all of my food, but the groceries were actually cheaper, I think, than they are here in America. My fiance's from Ireland, and she says all the produce here is just super expensive compared to Europe. And then also I felt like all the places I went to eat were pretty much the same price as America. And granted, they might be charging pounds, so it might be, 25% more expensive, but it wasn't outrageously so like I thought it would be. Another example is when I went to Mexico, I went to Playa del Carmen, and it's a huge tourist trap, like a huge tourist town. And you can either pay like $25 for an entree at like a nice restaurant with like a cool ambiance, or you can go like 2 blocks south and pay $4 for an entire dinner that's like authentically cooked Mexican food. And I liked the authentically cooked Mexican food way better than the stuff I was getting at the fancy restaurant, and it was way cheaper. All of these are options for you when you're traveling. Again, you just have to be willing to walk like 2 blocks to get cheaper food, and you should be fine. All right, now let's talk about getting around while you're in your destination. If you're like me and you're under 26, then they're gonna charge you way more for a rental car than you should be paying. I get it, they have to manage their risk, but I honestly love using public transport. In London, it was amazing. You can take it everywhere, and pretty much anywhere you go, they have a bus system that's pretty reliable, and that's way cheaper than using a taxi or than just Ubering everywhere or getting a rental car. For example, I'm going to Hawaii for my honeymoon in about a month, and we looked at the cost to rent a car versus just taking the bus from the airport to where we're staying, and the bus was $2 per person for an entire day pass, and renting a car is going to be about $100 a day, and we're not even going to use it every single day we're there. So we're like, well, may as well take the bus everywhere we go. If we need an Uber, we can get one, but we don't have to. That's kind of the approach we're taking. Another thing, when I went to Mexico, I found a bike shop and I just rented a bike for the week I was there. Most touristy places will have some sort of weekly bike rental like that, and again, way cheaper than renting a car. They give you a bike lock with it. Usually you have to like give them your ID so that they can chase you down if you steal the bike. But another great option to get around a little bit faster, go farther than you would normally be able to do, but not have to pay as much for Ubers or rental cars. And this bike point brings me to our last point, which is talking about what experiences you want to have while you're traveling. I found that the best experiences typically are just kind of hanging out with the locals and enjoying what they enjoy. So making friends with people wherever you're traveling. Obviously, this is a little bit more conducive if you're staying for a long time, doing some slow travel, as Nathaniel Drew calls it. But those experiences with the locals of wherever you're living are going to be the richest. They're going to be the things that you remember the most. Whereas just going to touristy places can be cool, but it's usually like hit or miss for me. Like 50% of the time, I'm like, that's amazing. And 50% of the time I was like, yeah, that wasn't that cool. One tip to think about is that if you're traveling to a place, you should look up where the off season for tourism is and maybe try to time your trip so there's not as many people there and you can kind of get a more authentic experience. When I went to London, there was obviously much fewer tourists because it was during 2020. I got to experience all of the touristy areas at this cool pace where like no other tourists were there hardly, which is very cool. And another quick tip when it comes to experiences, checking out the subreddit for wherever you're going and kind of looking through past people who've maybe asked touristy questions in that subreddit. You can find some really good insider advice from people who either live there or have gone on trips to wherever you're going. For example, all of the ones for Hawaii, each island has like a visit Kauai or a visit Maui subreddit. And if you go on there, it'll have tips from the locals. If you ask something, then people will answer you within a day or two, and you'll have some really good advice, like, like which helicopter tour to book or which zipline company to go with or whatever it is that you want to do. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning into this video. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. I release videos every week about how to grow your business and kind of design your life how you want it to be. If that interests you, I'd love to see you in future videos and in the comments down below. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.